Our featured guest is the Vice President and Political and Legislative Director of the Chicago Teachers Union, AFT Local 1. After her 12-year career as a classroom educator, she joined the revitalized Chicago Teachers Union. She's also exploded on the social change stage during this year's teacher strike as a badass public voice advocating for Chicago's black and brown youth. You know who the fuck I'm talking about. Let's make some noise for Stacy Davis-King! Stacy. Let's give it up again for Stacy Davis-King. I have some questions, Stacy, but the first one is, can you say it? I'm talking about that's petty. For those that don't know, my favorite part of the entire teacher strike was when Stacy was out in the cold, getting interviewed by reporters ahead of the negotiation talks. And someone said, well, Lori said you just you guys just wanted to strike anyway. And without flinching, without blinking, she said, that's petty, next question.
I was feeling it that day.
And it just, you know what it also is just like, I was like, damn, she's real as fuck. And I felt inspired to be realer in my own life. And I just have so much appreciation that I made a gift. A real fucking gift for you with our DJ E-Lock, and it's your very own juke track.
That's petty.
You all want to strike for some shit.
That's petty.
So that was a moment for you.
Yeah.
Right? We're not far, it was apparently one for me too. But we're not far enough from the end of the strike that I'd imagine the dust has settled a little bit for you. And so now kind of looking back, what have you learned from this experience of this historic strike, both for the CTU as a whole and also for you, individually?
So, just to be authentic. Like, it's enough that I'm enough. And I think that for women, black women in particular, especially like in this labor space, we often don't see ourselves enough. And so when we are there, we're always kind of like pinching ourselves, trying to figure out if we should be there. If what I'm saying can connect to those who are there because of the obvious like differences that you have. And so what the strike forced me to do was to trust my voice, to trust my instincts, but to also be brilliant. And to be okay with that. And not to pinch myself. There's nothing like your perspective becoming very focused and clear when there are tens of thousands of people on strike. Like literally not getting a check. They have families who they are responsible for, and you have to like bring your A game. It is not about your fear. It is not about your insecurity. It is not about anything except for bringing that thing home so people can have what they need and that you can honor the sacrifice that they're making.
Sounds really spiritual, man. It is, yeah.
Yes. People would tell me all the time, I pray for you. I'm praying for you. And I'm like, yo, I feel it.
Yeah.
I feel it because it was not my humanity that, were in those moments. Couldn't have been. I'm not that great. I am, so. It was truly, though, like the strength that you get from the collective. It was the many. It was knowing that this is right. Like I tell people, like I make a joke all the time that you can do anything if Pete Buttigieg can run for president of the United States. You know what I mean? And so, like, if we can all have the confidence of Pete,
Right.
If we could all have that confidence, you too can be great.
Right.
And so
It's so weird. I feel like I'm watching Lord of the Rings whenever he's on TV because he reminds me of Gollum. You know what I mean?
So no, it's a humbling space to be in as a leader, and it was clarifying. It was very clarifying.
It's weird. I use that word, right, like as clarifying, because so much of even in activist spaces or artist spaces, you always hear them saying like, "Oh, like we want to complicate things. I want to complicate," and I'm like, "No, motherfuckers, we're supposed to be clarifying
That's right.
shit. But it's already, complicated." And I also think there's that double word of clarifying, which is like kind of like purifying or
That's
cleansing
right.
yourself, and how like you can have all these things, and then the minute you become a part of like something bigger, it's purged.
That's right. Like all of that insecurity that you can always bring to the table because we all have them.
I mean,
Doesn't
speak for
matter.
yourself, Stacy.
Because I'm learning
Get a little
tonight.
lower now. But it was amazing to see you step forward as not just a spokesperson for the CTU on a national stage, but really as an embodiment of the work being done by the union and the struggle for equity for the communities, you serve.
That's right.
And like as a social change hero myself, I know what it's like to put yourself out there, to put your body on the line and use your voice to challenge power. You just become a symbol of the struggle and hope with the dimple chin. But you also find yourself in the line of fire, right? And so how did it feel to take on that role?
So I just put myself on a diet. I wasn't reading the comments because like, hashtag you ain't here.
Right.
So it really doesn't matter. It was important though to visit picket lines. It was important to speak to parents because I am a parent. I have 3 children. They're CPS students. So it was important for me to talk to other parents. It was important for me to talk to my children. It was important for me to always be in dialogue with it was important for me to be in dialogue with our members, who were making the sacrifice. But like people on Twitter and on Facebook, like I use it and I limit my use, of it because everyone has an opinion and that's okay. You get to have that and I don't have to read it.
Yeah. Were there any moments that, you were ever afraid of your safety or worried even, within the movement of being tokenized?
No, I'm covered and protected.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's number one. I'm okay with my safety. I know that. Number 2, the token, like that is so interesting to me because like this whole, like I was like feeling Jawanza when he was up here talking about this, the senior citizen, the, older black woman coming up talking about, we keep this in the kitchen. We do not bring this outside of our home space and like flog our black leadership. We don't do that. And so these politics of respectability were front and center because Lori is the first black woman to run this city. And how dare you get up there as a mouthpiece for these white Jews and have this conversation? Like that is like the blowback. And it's like, no, I think you missed what I said. How dare a black woman with 3 children who attended Chicago public schools, who live on the south side of Chicago, who has been pushed out of high schools as a teacher, how dare I get up and advocate for a nurse, a social worker, and a smaller class size? Is that the question? And so focusing it on what it is, if the first black female mayor cannot give black children what they need, we have not a chance in hell of anyone else doing it. So I have an expectation.
Did it make it harder having, that type of like representational, right? We were just talking about Jawanza and Obama, right? Like you mentioned, like having that type of representational breakthrough of having, queer black women as.
But I believe the queer young people who had already had an experience.
Right.
I believed them.
Yeah.
Right.
I was okay with their voice telling me I've had an experience. It was emotional. Here's evidence of this experience. And so I said, okay.
Right. So I think a lot of times, right, being a revolutionary means being a warrior that walks alone, right? And then how do you feel, and you mentioned it, right, people saying that you prayed for you, so you felt that the people had your back.
Absolutely. Like, I've never felt so loved, supported, and protected, like, in my life at a time where you were so vulnerable and so public and so out there that there were just equal parts of everything. and you receive strength from the love. Like, people love on you, you know, and they still love on you. You know, you go to the grocery store and they're like, wait a minute. And I'm like, how you doing? I know you from somewhere. I was like, you teach high school? You know, and so I know what they're saying. And like, honestly, like, our culture loves to embrace and place on platforms individuals.
Right.
And for the last 10 years, it's
And
been
I hate the spotlight. I'm such a shy person.
For the last 10 years, the Chicago Teachers Union has been undergoing this transformation of being a part of a coalition, right? And humbling ourselves and making ourselves available to spaces that don't have to take direction, but we are a part. Like, Jawanza, Coco was like, they were sleeping outside of the Board of Education before our leadership came into the Chicago Teachers Union. And you have to honor that. You have to be available to their leadership, to their voice and their direction in this. And so, this whole process about like getting attention, I'll say this, as a Black woman in any type of work, it is a blessing to be seen and heard. So I'm never gonna minimize that part of it, because historically we do the work, right? Part two of that though is, because now I am seen and I am heard, what do I get to say to contextualize why it can't just be one and why it has to be many? And yes, I can be special to you, but do you know how many other special women who look like me, sound like me, have had experiences, also deserve an opportunity not to just be a voice of this, right? They didn't give me talking points, I wrote the talking points. They didn't give me strategy, I was the strategist. And being able to like expose that, and to be transparent that this wasn't just me receiving, but this was me being a part of the creation and working and being a part of the collective that built the thing and having my voice heard. Like, you don't just, there's no overnight boom, you there. It just doesn't happen like that. There was struggle to get there. There was struggle being there. There was struggle in the moments of doing it. And being able to like tell people that out loud and be honest and transparent. Like, so being seen and heard in this moment is for me to tell other people, like, yo, you can do it.
Right. I mean, and speaking of doing it, right? Like, the strike was in many ways the first test of whether Lori Lightfoot would be the mayor she campaigned as, whereas the policymaker and person a lot of us always knew she was, right? And so from your negotiations that were effective, right? Like, it was an effective strike. What did you learn about her and the way her administration yields power?
They mean they mean well. One of the parts about this is that we were negotiating largely with the negotiating team that had done it before. Like, their side had experienced negotiators who had negotiated previous contracts. In fact, their labor attorney is an institution for every labor contract in the city of Chicago. That being said, one of the things that they centered both in the negotiating room and in the media was this concept of Black children can now be taken care of because you have these Black women who are in positions of leadership. And so while you may be rightly called out Rom's inability to be equitable and just, look at what we have here now. And I was so offended by that, because like, there ain't no magical Negro anywhere. So that's number one. And then number two, the system of white supremacy and misogyny and of subtraction that has been like cultivated since forever. Like, so she just got here 2 months ago, and now we're supposed to trust that it's gonna be okay, right? And it's not. So I was offended by like this headline that she got you, don't worry about it, going back to work, right? We'll figure it out. It'll happen, right? No, it doesn't happen like that. I'm a history teacher, a high school history teacher. Name something that has ever happened for somebody who is not male, white, and wealthy. that has happened because you asked nicely, or someone took pity on you, or they just said it was the right thing to do. I don't know what that is. I've never seen that example at all. What I have studied, what I've observed, what I've experienced is struggle, is fight, is resistance, is you taking it.
So there's our audience always ranges, but there's always a room full of people that have been doing the work, right? And they're looking at probably many people in this room that have been ready to take on Lori Lightfoot, whether it's for police accountability, gentrification, that fucking fedora, right? True. What advice do you have for... Where is it? What advice do you have for organizers who are trying to push the Lightfoot administration?
Don't shrink. Look, do not let gender, race, and sexual identification scare you off. Justice and equity, period. Justice and equity, period. Clarify, simplify, and stay focused on that. One of the things that we understand about capitalism, about imperialism, is that they come and get someone who looks like you, talks like you, identifies with you to kill you.
Right.
We know that. That is also a history lesson. And that being said, now I ain't saying she's trying to kill us, but before that become a thing.
Right.
I'm saying historically.
Right.
So, but stay focused. It is not the person. It is the thing that the people need. It is the thing that you need, where you have to focus and clarify on it. That was also the thing that was so irritating about the strike. Well, she's not wrong, and you can work with her and you can figure it out. And it's first off, if you go back to the 2012 strike and you compare the demands to the 2019 strike, it's the same thing. Right. And if we're clear too about 2012, it kind of wasn't about Rom either. He was just in the way. Right? And he made himself a target. He became an identifiable obstacle because he was just so arrogant with his neoliberalism.
Right.
50 schools, at least daily said, well, I'm gonna close 2 this year and 3 next year, and then I'm gonna erect. He took his time with it, right? Ron was like, y'all taking too long. Y'all gotta get out of here. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so he made it possible for us to organize because he was so brazen and out loud with his contempt for justice, equity, humanity, right? And so this whole concept that we have to have a villain, because she ain't really the villain either. Right. If we're honest about naming our enemies and being clear about who's in control of what, right? These are systems that have been cultivated for generations, and it doesn't matter who's driving the bus. She just happens to have the keys right now.
You gotta run that bus out to the bro. So I think one of the things about this strike that was so unique was that it became a vision about radical movement, right? And kind of a radical vision of the city. So beyond the strike, you had an instrumental hand in moving the union from liberal to progressive, and even in radical ways. Because it's I can't get over that. This was a teacher's contract that was saying we're going to center housing in a teacher's contract.
Well, I'd like to see you have a student in your classroom if he doesn't live in your attendance boundaries. I would like to see you have families that.
I don't know why you're taking it out on me. On your side, Stacy.
But it was maddening to me that people who otherwise would be intelligent could not make the connection. It's it is literally a connection between the people who live in a neighborhood and the number of children who attend that school. So even if I don't want to be progressive, righteous, human, right, and I just want to be about my bag, you need kids there.
Right.
That is a fundamental fact about how this works. If there are no students in a school community, there's no school community. So we have to start looking at the neighborhood, and anytime you can have a figure like 20,000 estimated homeless students, it's a big deal. But part two of that is that it's bigger than that. Because to your point earlier, Jawanza, about couch surfing, are you homeless if you on your TT's couch?
Yes.
You know, do you identify in that way? And so we have a lot of our students who don't identify in that way. So we don't know how many are like actually living insecurely in that way. Look, educators are cultivators of the common good. Like that is fundamentally our work. And if we can't center a fight around the needs for the common good as they relate to our ability, or in Chicago, our inability to produce the good, then what's the point, right? And so this whole discussion about housing is central, and we still didn't get enough on that, right? You got 6 months in the neighborhood surrounding the 606 to study what we already know. Think about that concept. You get 6 months after DePaul already put out a study. The study was like well documented, even in the Chicago Tribune of all places.
Yeah, I mean, also though about how the fact that like governance, right, like is so paternalistic, right, in a way in which like it views, right, like teachers that are organizing as unruly children, and women, right, as unruly children, but then also, right, how it views like that these individuals can never be credible bearers of knowledge. Right? Oh, we got to do a study. We got to do this because what you're saying and like that lived experience actually is not a valid form of knowledge.
Not at all. We're women too, and that is one of the most under talked about components to how this works. Shut up and do your job.
Right.
Like we are not that far removed from teachers having to leave their positions once they started showing, right, when they were pregnant.
Right.
We're not that far removed from putting in a contract like, yo, I get to get my job back after I have my child. Because the assumption was after I have my child that I don't work anymore. Right? So we are dealing with, again, generations of misogyny, generations of women being looked at as someone you tell what to do and that is not empowered in any of the spaces in which they occupy. And one of the things that, you know, we have frank talk about, or I have frank talk about, you know, with our union is even if you don't believe in the social justice unionism that this leadership is pushing out, right? You should be clear about the fact that racism exists every time you drive up in North Lawndale and you dodging sinkholes.
Right.
Or you're looking at yellow tape from the night before, right? So you don't have to believe it, just be able to identify it because you're experiencing the impacts of it in your classroom. So the ability to connect dots from the macro to the micro is increasingly important, not just in what we're doing, but in movement in general. Like this whole discussion about climate change. Like, honestly, if we do get a revolution, that's the only way I think we're gonna get it, right? Because you called us out. We on Amazon, we wearing Jordans, we because I have some on, you know. But like, think about how tied to the thing that we resist, but we also like buy into. I actually think that the climate crisis is the thing that is going to get people to have to, because capitalism is killing itself.
Right.
So it's not necessarily us as like good people and actors and those who want to see something different. It's actually the crisis in itself that is going to like choke out capitalism. And those freaks are so like seduced and
I love the poetics of the language. Choke out, freaks, seduced. I need a drink.
I forgot what I was gonna say. But they are so into making their money that they can't even pay attention to the damage they're doing to their bag.
Right, or that they're actually creating the conditions, right?
That's
And we
right.
saw that with Lightfoot, right? You know what I mean? That part of it was like, how do I secure this position of power? You know, by praying out.
But she didn't lie to us. I would tell you, people just don't listen well. People just don't listen well. Yo, she came to CTU and she said that Chicagoans can live within the means of what we have already. She said it. She said efficiencies. We have to first go through the budgets and figure out how to make it more efficient. When I hear that, I think black women are about to be laid off. Think about who works in like public governmental positions, right? And so I said, yo, I hear you, but I need you to also hear us. And this started early. It's like, we believe in big government, because in big government, women have jobs. And big government, black people can get to, you know, a space of where they're sufficient and can take care of some things. Healthcare, let's just say I get health insurance, right? Big government means our classrooms are smaller. Big government means you have social workers and nurses in the schools. That, like Sheila said when she got up here and talked about Flint and how they were coming from other countries. They weren't coming because it was so innovative. They was coming because they had scratch to pay for the very basic things that they needed in the school system. They could afford big government because they could tax for it, right? But we also believe that rich people get to pay for it. Right. And we were very, like, if you don't know that about us, you have not, like, paid attention. Right? And so to come in and say that you're for efficiencies, you about that life.
Yeah. You know, I'm thinking about, so there's a lot, my head is going, so one of the things I want to focus in on is like, I'm thinking about this experience I had, because what you're saying here is like, it's kind of like, you know, and your leadership in the union has been amazing, right? And I'm thinking about this time I went to go perform at Columbia Explorers with this theater company, Barrel of Monkeys, that's been renamed the Playmakers Lab. And, you know, it's the time when, you know, LaQuan McDonald, right? That cover up kind of like busted open. There was a moment when, you know, the undocumented movement was happening. Trump was president. And one of the things that was crazy is president, right? Yeah. I was just trying to manifest. I walk into the auditorium to perform, and a bunch of teachers start walking in, and they're wearing these pro-police shirts.
Yes.
And so, you know, and I thought about, like, as a grown-ass human being was feeling uncomfortable in that type of climate. I can't
This was
imagine.
we got in trouble.
And, you know, I was thinking about that with even just in thinking about, like, with the students, what they must be going through, especially when you think about undocumented and Mexican-American students who are told, like, you see a cop, you walk the other way, right? And then this figure who you're supposed to revere and feel closeness, we know that one of the predictors for student success is having trusted adults in your life. One of them, hopefully, is your teachers. And like, so
how do you do that?
Yeah, how do you deal with because I also think about radical movements and how often they break apart, right? It's like, no, we don't need inclusion. No, we don't. We you know, we're supremacists. No, we're separatists. We're this. You know what I mean? So how do you deal with those kind of fractures in your own union, and how do you see your role within that? You spoke on it a little bit, but I think it's so important because it's reflective.
So I'm getting fired on right now by that, like, some of that segment of our membership. We have members who live in all 50 wards, and cops marry nurses and teachers.
And then they move to Mount Greenwood.
Right. Well, in other neighborhoods too. How do we deal with that? It's about organizing. Like I said, it's macro and it's micro. And they have to be responsible for the empirical, concrete experiences that they are having on a daily basis. People ain't just making up poverty. People are not making up the trauma of violence and state-sanctioned violence.
Although sometimes I do act more upset about things so that my boyfriend could comfort me.
Well, sure.
Or like if I don't want to do something, I'll like really upset about it so that he'll do it.
We don't do that.
Okay.
But my point is that the burden has been on this group of leaders in our union who actually want to manifest the type of equity and justice that we need to see in our world, and to confront and challenge that. Like, I have nothing but love for like Jesse and for Karen for like blazing that trail and being unapologetic about it. The video came out the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, and we bold as hell. a robocall went out to every single member of the Chicago Teachers Union Thanksgiving evening to tell them to meet us downtown on a Magnificent Mile for the march in action. So those cops, those women that was wearing those t-shirts, they got the call, they got the robocall, and then they was firing like on Monday. It was like, and there are still some people who can't like get over that. And this is where this is where leaders have to be who they are, right? I have a black son. I have 2 black daughters. I got 2 black bonus sons. And that's it. It really is that simple. And you have to own that. And then you have to make, because it is personal. Like, that child belonged to a group of people. I don't give a damn if they were incapable at this point or not that point. He was a human being. People loved him. Sometimes we don't have the tools. Sometimes we don't know how. A lot of things happen, right? Parenting is very difficult. I'm sure I'm fucking up one of them right now. I am confident I am doing it. You know what I mean? And so, that being said, like, you have to suspend it and you have to deal with the humanity. And you have to make people responsible for the humanity. Strip all of that other stuff down. What'd that look like to you?
Yeah. I'm thinking about even like, do you feel the activism the activism in Chicago that's been happening amongst young women? I'm even thinking about the moment when Paige May, you know, at the protest downtown said "fuck the police."
That was interesting.
Right? But do you feel that even that activism has created some kind of influence within the Chicago Teachers Union, or has been, you know?
So I remember it well. Look, it's what it is. I'm a high school teacher, so perhaps. Like, they've said, fuck me. Like, if you want to keep it, like, all the way legitimate, right. They've said that to me directly. So, she had a lot of, like, space with people because of who we are. We are teachers. Like, I'm not a union boss. I'm not a union leader. I am a teacher who happens to be in this space because it was too difficult to stay in my space as a teacher. So it's like, this gives me another outlet. And like, look, it's 50 wards, different people, different experiences. And if it's one thing that I expect educators to do, is to take a deep breath, deconstruct, figure out how to move forward, right? Like, that is our responsibility. Like, I will tell you guys, like, I don't know how many bitches I got called today, but I know that tomorrow. No, but in the classroom. Yeah. Like, you are legitimately dealing with children who can come into your classroom, dealing with trauma that is not fair for a grown person, much less a child. Yep. Right? And so then you get an experience, and they bring that trauma. I was like, dude, I ain't do it. Good morning. Right? But I have to go back tomorrow, and I got to forget about the abuse that you just gave to me because I got a job to do. And there could have been other places. I could have went to New Trier potentially where that type of trauma wasn't prominent, but that wasn't what I chose to do. So I'm also choosing to take deep breaths, figure it out, and move it forward. So you came to Chicago Public Schools knowing full well the racist, segregationist history of this space, and that it could have, based on all of the adolescent psych or the childhood psychology classes that you took, that these things could manifest in whatever way that they manifest. A part of our work is being able to synthesize the world in which we are educating and the world in which those who are coming to us for an education are dealing with. Like, it is not, that's the whole point about this pushback about the testing and stuff. Like, yo, I don't have time for all of that. Right. You just don't, because you're dealing with other things. That's why the nurse is so important to have there. That's why the social worker is so important to have there. That's why the counselor not toting around number 2 pencils and testing booklets, but can actually be in a situation where they can have one-on-one interaction with kids. Like the suicidal ideation, like high. And I ain't talking about high school, I'm talking about elementary school, right? Homicidal ideation. high. Still not talking about high school, talking about elementary school. Our children are in pain. And so as grown-ups who signed up to deal with children in these spaces, we need a lot of support, but we also need a lot of patience and understanding at the same time too. It's part of the work.
Right. All right. You guys aren't clapping for me like that tonight. Trash. And speaking of the strike, it revealed that a lot of people are trash.
Yes.
And have a lot of trash perspectives. You know, I mean, like, and, you know, so I'm even thinking about that moment when you said, like, that's petty, let's keep it moving. I want to close out on a game where you name the 5 pettiest things. What are the 5 pettiest things you heard someone say during the strike?
Well, the first one was that we were going to go on strike. It didn't matter. Like the mayor kept saying that. It didn't matter what they gave us, how they came to the table, we were going to go on strike. And I'm like, yo, do you know how difficult it is to get a teacher to like push back?
Right.
That is not their first response. It is never, it ain't even a 5th response. Right? So, no, that was petty. I think another petty thing that I experienced is that the white Jews was feeding me talking points. And I'm like, the only people who get to tell me what to do are 10, 8, and 6. Like no one else. And I'll call my dad and he'll tell you for sure. So that was extraordinarily petty and sexist, you know, racist. So those 2 things. I think the third thing that I experienced is that this black woman as savior to all of the white supremacy and the impact of their garbage over time, that they, Janice and Lori, were somehow going to sprinkle black girl magic around, and that damn, it was gonna work. So I think that's the third thing. 2 more things that were petty. This shit about our strike getting in the way of the athletes, getting, not competing, because I did feel a way about that. Not competing, but scholarships. I was like, first off, I know this hasn't changed. If you need the last game for a scholarship, you ain't getting one. It ain't happening. So, like, I know that. So that part of it was, it's like, look, I get that it's terrible for them to experience this in this way. I was an athlete throughout school, so I get that. But I do know that last part, like if he needs or she needs to get a scholarship for that last game, it ain't gonna happen. So that's 4. And 5 was this bullshit about like our veteran pay. And perhaps that is the top. It's like, Sun-Times just published the story, I think it was last Friday. So we got $25 million for veteran pay. This is like too much information, but so we got $25 million for veteran pay. Why is that important? Because as a newer educator, you do not know what you're doing, at least into the 5th year of your experience. That's if you're special. That is if you're special, because it is really a difficult job. And it is a constant. Like there's no breaks in an elementary school. Nothing. So it takes a while to get there. And so veteran teachers have the capacity to stabilize a school community and offer mentorship and good direction, not just for the educators, but for parents, because if they're there, then they've had multiple children in a family. So they're anchored and connected. For the principal, who's usually 12 and doesn't know much, and they can, no, seriously, they can be helpful in those situations. And so what CPS has done is push out veteran teachers because they don't reward that in compensation in ways that other districts tend to do. Juxtaposed to that, our veteran teachers have been black teachers by and large because our system used to be anchored by black female teachers, educators, right? Not anymore because you closed down 50 schools. You close down 10 this year, you close down 2 this year, and then you start privatization. And private charter operators ain't hiring, Miss Gladys. They're just not, because Miss Gladys, no. You know what I mean? She knows. And so they're not gonna hire her. That being said, anchoring like this whole concept of like compensating fairly, securing their services, honoring the work of women who have done it for a while, and in this case, in Chicago, Black women, it was important for us, right? Because if you look at the Chicago Teachers Union over time, who do you know? Jackie Vaughn and Karen Lewis, right? And so if it can't just be them, it has to be the actual women in the building. But I said all of that to say, so that was a sticking point. Like, we was on strike for 11 days. And on day 10, we were summoned to the 5th floor. And she said, okay. Now, they're talking about a bonus. No one has said anything about a bonus. Like, when I say irritated, petty, that right there, because first off, bonus talk is Rahm Emanuel talk. Like, if we want to center this correctly. Part 2, there's nothing in the history of our compensation that's ever said it. And then finally, which I think is the most persuasive, ain't a damn contract demand that you can find that don't say steps and lanes, because that is how we are compensated within our profession. And so it is petty to get to the end where you just got to figure out the details and to say, yeah, we don't know what you're talking about.
You just want to take a fedora and burn it. One of the things, I think one
You
of
are actually like provoking like actions in my head about like the whole theme of a fedora and how you use a fedora in that action.
Yeah.
Organize.
Thank you. I'm gonna steal it and use it because that hasn't happened to Black women before. I won't do that. So I think about so many people were down to show up for you all. You know what I mean? I know, like, even my family members, that we're showing out on the lines and things like that. What are ways now that the strike is over that we can keep on supporting this teachers movement?
That's a perfect question. So, very perfect question. Number one, LSCs, local school councils. That is the only democracy some school communities have, because if you're on probation, who knows what probation is this year, you don't actually have the ability to control the budget and the hiring and firing of the administrator there. But LSCs, run for your LSC. Right. Even if you don't have children, you can rep the community. So involve yourself there. Part 2 of that, one of the things that I'm like so proud of in this contract is that we have front-loaded equity. And so as we are implementing staffing levels with social workers and nurses, as we are implementing class size, we are prioritizing the school communities that have traditionally needed the most, right? So class size happens first in school communities in Inglewood and Roseland, right? Because those students have demonstrated a need for more support. So often we put all of these demands and accountability measures in spaces like that because Black kids gotta learn, because that's a civil rights issue of our time, but somehow they forget the money. Somehow they forget the actual personnel. Somehow they forget the mentoring and the professional development. So this contract prioritizes that, it front loads that. So ask for it. If you are teaching, if you are involved in, if you're sending your child to, or family members to places that you know should be a priority for more resources, start asking those questions out loud. Number 2, like, look, the movement is not just about that classroom. It's actually the macro part. I need y'all fighting for an Obama CBA, because kids in Woodlawn go to schools in Woodlawn and they need a thing, right? It's not enough for them to put up drywall in Hyde Park and say we did a thing, because they really did, and Hyde Park was, anyway. Anyway, but it's not enough, to do that. It's all of the movements that surround our neighborhoods that matter the most to our school communities, because we need families to be whole. We need students to be whole. We need the neighborhoods in which they reside in to be whole in order for it to work in the school community. And then also, holla at us. Like, make sure that there are red t-shirts there too, right? We have to continue to be a part of the community that holds us down, who supports us, who loves us. Yeah, you love your teachers, and your teachers got to love back on you too. And so, and that is a hallmark of this. Like, coalition work means coalition work.
Right.
She's so inspiring. I feel so much better about the world. I'm so grateful, and I feel so lucky that you were here tonight.
Yo, this is like, I didn't know about this. I'm asleep right now normally. And so, but I think this is the dopest thing. Like, this is so everything to me. The fact that you travel to gentrifying neighborhoods to shop, so people can, because you get on the expressway and you don't see the city, right? We take the shortcut, and that is the reason for the expressway, to be honest with you, right? So we don't do that. We are not intentionally involving ourselves in spaces that need it unless you're going to a school building. I went out to, I'm gonna be quiet after this, but where was I? Altgale Gardens. I had never been to Altgale Gardens until after we settled the contract. I was irritated for a week.
Right.
That's a compound.
Right. Around all gentrifying, beautiful neighborhoods.
It is a compound.
Yeah.
Which schools, like, you ain't got to go nowhere.
Right.
How often? No train. The bus could come and leave. It was a lot. It was a lot. So yeah, we have to be community members. We have to be neighbors. We have to do this together. It doesn't change without it. It just doesn't. And like this whole magical black girl stuff, do not believe the hype. I ain't got no magic. I cuss, I carry on, I cry, I deal with insecurities. I do everything that you do. And you know what I do? I take deep breaths, I talk to myself, I say I can do it. I find people who help build me up, who love on me, who push me. You all can do that too. This is not anything special or magical. We all have the capacity to do it, and like, we gotta do it. It depends on it. Donald Trump literally has children in frickin' cages.
Yeah.
And he is defending that like ain't nothing wrong with it. We have got to be as bold as people to judge.
Let's give it up for Stacy Davis Gates. One more time for Stacy Davis Gates.